She didn't text. She didn't post. She didn't pull a teammate aside in private. Sophie Cunningham walked directly into the center of that locker room, looked Kelsey Mitchell in the eyes, and said exactly what nobody else had the courage to say out loud. And the Indiana Fever? They will never be the same after it. Here's what you need to understand before any of this makes sense. This was not a fight about basketball. This was not about shot attempts or usage rates or who gets the ball in the fourth quarter. This was about something far more dangerous inside a professional locker room. It was about loyalty. And the moment someone questioned whose side Sophie Cunningham was on, she answered loudly, permanently. But to understand why that moment hit like a thunderclap, you have to go back to where the pressure actually started building. When Caitlin Clark walked into Gainbridge Fieldhouse in 2024, she didn't just join a basketball team. She detonated a grenade inside an entire sports industry. Sellouts everywhere. Road arenas packed in cities that hadn't cared about the WNBA in years. Television ratings climbing to numbers the league had genuinely never seen. Clark merchandise moving faster than championship gear. The Indiana Fever, a franchise that had spent the better part of a decade quietly disappearing from a national conversation, was suddenly the story in American sports. Not women's basketball, not the WNBA. All of it, every sport, all at once. And in the middle of all that noise, Kelsey Mitchell kept showing up. No fanfare, no viral moments, no ESPN countdown clocks tracking her every move. Just Mitchell, every single night, doing exactly what she had always done, which was put the work in, carry the weight, and compete like her life depended on it. She had been doing that long before the cameras arrived. She was doing it during the seasons when the Indiana Fever averaged fewer than 5,000 fans per game, when national media treated a Fever road trip like background noise, when being the best player on that roster meant being the best player that almost nobody was watching. Mitchell never complained about any of it. That's not who she is. But here's the thing about professional athletes that casual fans almost never appreciate. They see everything. When Clark went down with a groin injury in July of 2025 and missed the bulk of the regular season, Mitchell didn't hesitate. She picked up the entire offensive system and carried on her back through 44 regular season games and every single playoff contest. 26 points per game in the postseason. Career-high averages across the board. Her first all-WNBA first-team selection. A recognition that was years overdue and arrived at exactly the moment when it cost her the most to earn it. She dropped 34 points against the Las Vegas Aces in a playoff game Indiana desperately needed to survive. 34 points against one of the most suffocating defensive rosters in the entire league. And the camera still cut to Caitlin Clark sitting on the bench in street clothes. The broadcast still led with Clark's name. The national write-up still framed every Mitchell moment inside the larger narrative of what it all meant for the franchise Clark was building. Mitchell never said a word publicly. Not one. But that kind of thing doesn't evaporate just because nobody talks about it. It settles. It sits in the corners of the locker room, quiet and heavy, until the right person in the wrong moment gives it somewhere to go. Sophie Cunningham had a front row seat to every single bit of it. And there is something about Sophie Cunningham that gets completely buried every time the media covers this story. She is not just a player who knocks down threes and plays physical defense. She is someone who earned a black belt in Taekwondo before she was old enough to play organized basketball. She grew up wired differently. She processes confrontation differently than most people in that league. When something is wrong in front of her, she doesn't manage it. She doesn't defer. She doesn't look away and hope it resolves itself. She acts. And the moment Kelsey Mitchell said what she said, the moment those words left her mouth and landed inside that locker room, Sophie Cunningham made a decision that changed the entire temperature of this franchise. What Mitchell actually said is the part that nobody expected, and what Cunningham did in response. That's what broke this story wide open. Before we get to what Sophie said, you need to hear what Kelsey Mitchell did first. Because this didn't start with a confrontation. It started with a moment that was never supposed to be heard by anyone outside that building. A hot mic, a raw, unfiltered confession. and a room full of professional athletes who suddenly had to decide which side of the line they were standing on. It happened in the kind of setting where athletes let their guard down just enough to be human. Not a press conference, not a post-game interview with cameras in their faces and PR handlers nearby. It was the in-between space, the tunnel, the warm-up, the quiet before the noise, where players say the things they would never say in front of a microphone on purpose. Except this time, the microphone was already on. Kelsey Mitchell's words carried, and what she said wasn't vicious. It wasn't a personal attack. It wasn't the kind of thing you could frame as jealousy or pettiness if you were being honest about it. It was something closer to pain. She talked about what it felt like to pour everything she had into a franchise for years, and then watch the entire conversation around that franchise shift the moment someone new walked in. She talked about carrying a team through a playoff run while nursing a body that had been pushed past its limit, and then opening her phone and seeing her performance described as a footnote in someone else's comeback story. She wasn't wrong about any of it. That's what made it land so hard inside that locker room. Professional sports teams are not families. Not really. They are collections of intensely competitive people who are asked to subordinate their individual ambitions to a shared goal, and the tension in that ask never fully disappears. It just gets managed. Some teams manage it brilliantly. Some teams manage it until they can't. The Indiana Fever had been managing it, but when Mitchell's words got out, the management stopped working. Some players heard what Mitchell said and felt in their chests, because they had been feeling the same thing quietly and hadn't found the words for it yet. Others heard it and felt the opposite, a surge of protectiveness for Clark, for what she had built, for what the attention she brought had given all of them in terms of visibility, platform, and opportunity. Within hours, that locker room had fault lines running through it that nobody could pretend weren't there. And that's when Sophie Cunningham decided she was done watching from the sideline. Here is what separates Sophie Cunningham from most people in this situation. She didn't go to the coaching staff. She didn't post a cryptic message online. She didn't pull Clark aside first to warn her or pull Mitchell aside privately to smooth it over. She went directly to the source. She walked up to Kelsey Mitchell in front of people who were watching and said something that stopped the room. Now, there are two versions of what happened next, and both of them have been circulating inside league circles in ways that tell you this story isn't close to finished. The first version says Cunningham came in swinging, that she defended Clark without flinching, that she told Mitchell directly that everything Clark brought to Indiana had lifted every player in that building whether they wanted to admit it or not, that the sellouts and the television deals and the expanded media coverage had given players like Mitchell the audience their talent had always deserved but never received, and that burning it down over credit was a wrong fight at the wrong time. The second version says something more complicated, that Cunningham didn't just defend Clark, that she actually validated part of what Mitchell said first, that she acknowledged the imbalance was real, that the spotlight had been unfair, that Mitchell had earned more than she received, and that none of that changed what Cunningham was about to say next. That second version is the one that has people in the league talking. Because if Cunningham stood in that room and told Kelsey Mitchell that she was right about the injustice and still told her she was wrong about what to do with it, that is a very different kind of confrontation than the one the headline suggested. That is not someone defending a teammate. That is someone trying to save a franchise from itself. And Caitlin Clark, sitting somewhere in Indianapolis, recovering, preparing for her return, had no idea any of this was happening in her name. Or did she? Everyone was watching Kelsey Mitchell and Sophie Cunningham. Nobody was watching Caitlin Clark. That was a mistake. There's a version of this story where Caitlin Clark is a passive figure. Someone things happen around. Someone the franchise orbits, but who remains untouched at the center, unaware, recovering quietly while the people around her navigate the friction her presence created. That version is almost certainly wrong, because here is what people consistently underestimate about Caitlin Clark, and have been underestimating since the moment she stepped onto an Iowa court and started rewriting the record books. She is always paying attention. This is not someone who stumbled into greatness through raw talent alone. This is someone who spent years studying the game at a level that made coaches and analysts genuinely uncomfortable with how prepared she was. She read defenses before they materialized. She understood spacing and gravity and court geometry the way most players don't understand it until their 8th or 9th professional season. That same intelligence doesn't turn off when she walks out of the gym. Multiple people connected to the Fever organization have suggested, carefully, without putting their names on it, that Clark knew the tension was building long before Mitchell's words became a locker room crisis, that she had sensed the fault lines, that she had, in her own quiet way, been thinking about how to handle it. What she hadn't anticipated was Sophie Cunningham handling it first. Here is what the most credible accounts of that locker room moment agree on. Cunningham did not deliver a speech. She did not perform for the room. She didn't make about sides or loyalty tests or who had been in Indiana longer and who owed what to whom. She said something simple, something that cut through all of it. She told Mitchell that the league they were both playing in, the league that was finally getting the television deals and the arena upgrades and the salary conversations that players have been fighting for across decades, that league existed right now, at this specific moment in history, because of the kind of attention that Caitlin Clark had generated. Not because Clark was more talented than the players who came before. Not because she deserved more credit than Mitchell or Aya Wilson or Breanna Stewart or any other elite player in the league. But because attention, once it arrives, has to be protected. Not for one player, for all of them. She told Mitchell that everything Mitchell had earned, the all-WNBA selection, the career-high numbers, the playoff moments that deserved national coverage, all of it had a bigger audience now than it ever would have without what Clark brought to the building. And then she said the part that nobody expected. She told Mitchell that if she had a problem with how the spotlight was being distributed, she should say it directly to Clark's face, not to a room, not to a microphone that happened to be live. Directly, honestly, like the competitor she had proven herself to be every single night for years. The room went completely silent. What happened after that silence is the part that tells you everything about where this franchise is actually headed. Mitchell didn't walk away. She didn't deflect or dismiss or retreat into the kind of professional non-answer athletes use when they want a moment to disappear. She nodded. That's it. One nod. But inside a professional locker room, in that specific moment, one nod means something enormous. It means the conversation isn't over. It means it's just beginning. But now it's going to happen in the right room, between the right people, without the noise of cameras and media narratives and social media speculation drowning out what actually needs to be said. Caitlin Clark's return to that court is going to be one of the most watched moments in WNBA history. The league knows it. ESPN knows it. The fans who've been following this story know it. But the real game, the one that determines whether Indiana becomes a dynasty or fractures under the weight of its own potential, that game is already being played, quietly, behind closed doors, between three women who are each, in their own way, carrying something the other two can't fully see. Sophie Cunningham didn't end the chaos. She just made sure it had somewhere honest to go. And in professional sports, that is sometimes the most important play anyone makes all season. If this story hit different for you, you already know what to do. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Whose side are you on? And do you think this Indiana Fever roster has what it takes to hold together when Clark comes back? Subscribe if you want the stories that go deeper than the highlights. We will be here when the next chapter breaks. Because in the WNBA right now, the next chapter is never far away.